got interesting stuff to talk about. But anyway, we are studying in Joshua, and last week we left off at verse 17, where Rahab had basically made the two spies swear that they would make sure she was taken care of for the service that she had provided them with hiding them. And actually, when it came right down to it, she pretty much saved their lives in the situation. So this is kind of the thought that we're going to go through to the end of the chapter. They've been there. They've done all their surveillance that they're going to do. They've come together with their escape plan, and these are the last few issues that need to be dealt with before they make their escape and go back to make their report to Joshua. So we're going to just read verse 17, then we'll actually pick up with verse 18 and talk a little bit about the conditions of the promise that was made. So before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin Cleveland, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer. Amen. So let's look quickly at verse 17. It says, "And the men said unto her, We will be blameless of thine oath, which thou hast made us swear." Then verse 18 says, "Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by, and thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household unto thee." So here the spies make some conditions that need to be met to fulfill the oath that they had made to her. Now, the first condition here was that when the town was taken, Rahab should make the house known to the Israelites, and the way that she was going to do it was she was going to display the cord of crimson thread, and this is probably the same cord that she was going to lower the spies down with, and it was going to be put in probably the same window that she let them down from. Because if you'll remember, we talked about before that her house was on the wall. So when the children of Israel approached, they would be able to see this particular window, and they would be able to see this particular cord that was passed there. So by the way that this is written, it talks about this cord. It kind of brings you to the conclusion that this was the same rope that was talked about back in verse 15, because there's really no other mention of any other thing that would lead you to any other conclusion. And it was something that was already there. It was something that Rahab would not have to look for. It was already there. It was known by the spies. It was known by her, and it would be a good sign. The other thing that we note here is the color of the cord. It was scarlet, and this is the kind of the color of a vigorous life. And the cord was an expression of a sign of preservation of not only Rahab's life, but also the lives of her relations here. Now, we also see that there is a second condition, and it was that when the town was taken, Rahab should collect all of her family, her brothers, her sisters, her parents, and they all need to be in that house, because we know that there was a lot of destruction that went on in Jericho when the children of Israel took the city. So they were all to be there gathered together in the house. It's kind of reminiscent of the Passover in Egypt, where the children of Israel would gather into their house, and they were basically forbidden to go outside. And we're going to kind of see the same scenario here as this thing plays out. So, any comments about that verse?
It's interesting the way that they said that if you don't follow these conditions, we're not liable for what happens to you.
Right. They're going to be guiltless, and that's what we're going to talk about here in the next.
The way it translates, it's almost like it's almost a little hateful the way it comes out.
Almost like a threat.
But it was a threat, and it certainly said, we're going to do our part, but you're going to do your part right now.
Right. Right. And that's typical of anything that has to do with with even the gospel. It's there, but you have to do your part. And that's and we've seen this all the way through our studies that the condition was there, but everybody had to do their part. And go ahead.
The denominations out there just still don't understand today.
Right.
It's constant at the current. It's all grace, but you have to do something.
Right. Right. All right. Let's look at verses 19 and 20. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thine house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if thou utter this our business, then we will quit of thine oath, which thou hast made us to swear. So here we see a little bit more about the conditions here that are made, and they're kind of fine tuning it a little bit. And they're basically being told, you need to stay in the house. If you go out of the house, it's not on us; it's on whoever goes out of the house. And they're going to be slain by the Israelite soldiers, and it's not going to be the fault of the spies. It's going to be whoever wanders out of the house because they disobeyed the contract, is what this basically was, between the spies and Rahab. But everyone that was in the house with her was going to be safe. And if something happened to them, then their blood is going to be up on the spy's head, and it's going to be their problem, and it's going to be punishment for them. So we see here the phrase, his blood upon his head. And this is synonymous with a legal formula that, his blood be upon him. And this is discussed in Leviticus 20 and 9. And it says, and any man who curses his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. And he has cursed his father and mother, his blood shall be on him. So this was a common phrase that was used in a very serious situation in that day and time. And I'm sure that it wasn't lost on Rahab, the seriousness that the spies were taking these things that they were being told. And then here we see a third condition, and it basically is a repetition of the condition that was laid down at the very onset, that she had to keep her mouth shut. Don't tell your neighbors what's going on. Don't loose lips sink ships, one of those type of deal. But if you think about it though, Rahab is probably not going to do that anyway, for the simple fact that she had already lied to the king and told him that she didn't know anything about it. So I mean, if she would go and tell everybody what was going on, she probably wouldn't make it to the time that the children of Israel came. They'd probably go on and kill her then. So I mean, it's just kind of a reminder there that if you go tell anybody of the things that are going to happen, then all bets are off. So not only is it going to be a problem for her, but it's going to be a problem for her family. So her life is basically going to depend on the secrecy that she keeps, not only her life, but the lives of her her family members too. So this kind of adds to to any motive that she would have of double crossing the spies and letting the cat out of the bag, as it were, because, like I say, it's going to be on her and on her family. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 21. And she said, according unto your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet line in the window. So she basically agreed to the conditions, and she knew what the conditions were that were going to be required. And we see that she actually started going and taking care of the conditions, and she sent them away. Of course, we know from the previous, she was sending them to the mountains to hide there while the troops were hunting for them. And she already starts to go and to put this scarlet line in the window. She does it immediately. Now, there's several thoughts from the scholars about why she did it at this point. One obvious thing is that so she wouldn't forget to do it. Okay, but on the other hand, though, and I think it's a good point that was made, if she goes on and does it, and it's there in the window for a time, passersby aren't going to think anything about it, because it's been there for a long time. And we're not sure exactly what the time frame was between the time that this happened and they went and surrounded the city of Jericho. It was a relatively short period of time, but she went on and put this thing up, and really it was a pretty smart thing on her part, not to bring attention to things that are that might happen in the future. And you've got to kind of remember too that even though they didn't have radar and all this kind of stuff like they've got now, when a large army was approaching the city, it was obvious that they were coming. There was dust and clouds and things along that line of the movements. So it's not going to be a complete surprise that the city is getting ready to be invaded. There's going to be some prior notice, and if something all of a sudden changes, that may raise a flag with the authorities that maybe Rahab knows something that might be of benefit.
You have to admire the fact that Rahab was not a procrastinator.
Right.
And what a lesson for us today, that souls are on the line, and we don't know the time the Lord's going to come back. And we can't wait to the last minute and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to obey." She gave us an example here. She didn't waste any time. She agreed to something and she carried it out.
Well, and you think about it, and in many sermons at the end when the invitation is given, today's the day of salvation. You may not have another chance. And if you look at the history of warfare, there has been many battles lost because at the end of the day the troops didn't cross the river. They waited until the next day, and that waiting until the next day led to their defeat. And here's a situation here where she's not going to take any chances. She's going to make all the preparations beforehand, and that way when the time comes, everything is going to be ready, because it's going to be a pretty chaotic time. She's got to get all the people gathered in and all that type of thing, and this is something that is requiring some attention to detail. So she's taking care of the detail up front. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 22. And they went and came into the mountain and abode there 3 days until the pursuers were returned. And the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. So the spies, true to what they were supposed to do, they went to the mountains and they hid out probably in one of the caves. And the soldiers or the pursuers are the ones that were trying to find them. They looked for 3 days, and we've discussed why they looked for 3 days. But they were able to successfully evade the people that were looking for them. And obviously, I think you can see the providence of God there, that He protected the spies, because all the way through this, the spies had been faithful and they had done the things that they were supposed to do. And obviously, it was in God's plan that, the children of Israel take the city of Jericho. So if it was in his plan, he was going to support the ones that were, carrying out the plan. And again, they're doing what they were supposed to be doing. So after 3 days, the pursuers didn't find them, and the spies, of course, obviously returned back to report to Joshua. And we had talked about these mountains before. It was probably the mountain range that were on the north side of Jericho. And we talked about the height there is somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 feet. Got a lot of caves and things along that line. So it made for a really good place to hide, because it would probably been a very difficult place to search, trying to go up the hill and search all the different caves and all that type of thing. And also there's some mention by the scholars of this Wadi Kel. Well, Wadi is like a little river, and that may have been a factor also in them not being able to find it. They were having to work around getting through that little wadi if it was up. Comments about that verse or those verses? All right, let's look at verses 23 and 24. So the two men returned and descended from the mountain and passed over and came unto Joshua the son of Nun and told him all things that befell them. And they said unto Joshua, truly, the Lord hath delivered unto our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. So their mission was accomplished. They made their way out of the mountains back to the camp on the other side of Jordan, and they made their report to Joshua of all the things that had happened to him. And I'm sure that they filled him in on the pact that they had made with Rahab, and so he would have a good understanding of that. And they talked about what they saw, and they talked about what they heard. And of course, one of the things that they heard was that the inhabitants of the country were scared to death of the children of Israel because their reputation had preceded them. And you've got to imagine that they were pretty fired up about the situation and very excited, because they gave a good report to Joshua. And I'm sure that Joshua expected a report like that but it reaffirmed to the spies, it reaffirmed to Joshua, and that he would be able to pass this information on to his other subordinates of the things that were seen, and it's going to encourage them also, and let them know that there's not going to be a whole lot of resistance when they go across Jordan and take the land. And truly, they will can be assured that the Lord is going to be with them. Any comments about that verse or that chapter?
The first time they sent the 12 spies, 10 of them come back with a faint heart.
Right.
Now it's just the opposite. The people are faint heart.
Right. All right. Let's do a little modern technology here. So now let's move on to chapter 3. So basically, this is the start between this chapter going in all the way into the 5th chapter and the 12th verse. This is the description about the children of Israel going into the promised land. And obviously, this is a very important event in the life of the children of Israel. They've waited 40 years for this to happen. One complete generation has passed away, and now we're in another generation, probably part of another one. So the writer here marked this thing off in 3 basically major movements. Each one of these movements begins with a command of God to Joshua. It's followed by the communication of the command to the people, and then the execution of the command by the people. So God makes the command, Joshua communicates it to the people, and the people follow through and do what the Lord tells them to do. And that's kind of a winning formula for the children of Israel. The problem is in later years they kind of got away from that. They kind of got away from that formula. So the way the narrator told this story seems designed to impress on the reader that it was God who was bringing his people miraculously into the land. So, God was the center of all this. It was his plan. And as long as they followed his plan, the execution was going to go without a problem. So we're going to start here in verse 3, the preparations and the instructions for crossing the river Jordan. So let's look at verse 1. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they moved from Shittim and came to Jordan. He said to he and all the sons of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. So this was probably the morning after the spies had returned and made their report. Now, the scholars seem to think that this was the 9th of Nisan for the day that this is talked about, and then they were going to do their crossing on the spies came back, and then the crossing was going to take place on the 10th when they passed over Jordan. And Moses had, according to the Jewish writers, died on the 7th of Adar or our February, and the 30 days of mourning ended on the 7th of this month, which would be March in our time. So 2 days before they were ended, the spies were sent, and they returned on the 8th day of the month. And then the following morning, Joshua rose early, which shows his readiness. He was ready to go. Got up early, made the preparations, made sure that everybody else was ready for the little expedition that they were going to take across the river. So if you look at this, this is probably in the year 2553 BC, which was of course the 40th year from the exodus from Egypt. So from Shittim, where they had been encamped, they moved to the banks of Jordan, which is about 60 strata, according to Josephus, which is about 8 English miles. So that morning they went about 8 miles to get in position there on the river Jordan. So Joshua, as their general, they had an army of about 600,000 men under his command, and that's not counting the women and the children and all the other things that were going to have to be taken across with them. So they pretty much laid there in encampment, prepared to cross over the river Jordan. Comments about that verse? Let me go back here and look. So the spies returned on the 9th, which would be in March, and then they took off on the 10th in March. Okay. All right, let's look at verse 2. And it happened after 3 days, the officers went through the host. So these 3 days are probably to be understood as soon as Joshua took the command of the army, he sent the spies to ascertain the state of Jordan. So, there's a lot of things that happened. These things were happening simultaneously, and they're not exactly being recorded in complete chronological order, because there's a lot of, you have to tell different parts of the story and put it together. So they returned at the end of the 3 days, or rather on the third day, and they made the report. And it was at this time, immediately on the return of the spies, that Joshua made the proclamation that is talked about here, and made sure that it was communicated to his people. So there was a lot of things that had to happen before they crossed over the Jordan. They had to strike their tents, get all their tents and things taken down. They had to accumulate. Remember back in previous chapters, it talked about they need to assemble their food. There's animals that had to be dealt with. There was a lot of preparation that was going to have to be made because, this is a major move from one side of the river to the other with a lot of people. And if you think about it, there was probably some people that weren't in the best health. There was going to have to be preparations made for them. There was a lot of things that had to go on. And Joshua had a lot of things, I'm sure, on his mind as these things were done in this 3-day period with all the preparation that needed to be done. So the host is talked about here not only consisted of the army, but the women, the children, and all the things had to be done because they were going to be advancing into a hostile country. And everything, pretty much had to be done right. Even though the Lord had given them the land, there was still a lot of stuff that they were going to have to do. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 3. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall move from your place and go after it. So in the name of Joshua, he sent out these orders all to the different tribes. And obviously it went down the chain of command and through the communication structure. But we see here that the priests are the ones who were going to be carrying the Ark of the Covenant across the River Jordan. And normally that wasn't a job that the priests did. The Levites, particularly the Kodahites, they were the ones who bared the ark. And there's a lot of preparation that had to be made to bear the ark because it was still a deal where no man was allowed to touch the ark. They used the stays and all that type of thing. So some preparation obviously had to be made for that to pass through the over the Jordan. So there's a lot written in the Jewish writings about all the different things that was taking place here. And one of the things that was mentioned is this was a very unusual situation when the priests were actually carrying the ark. And there's only three other times and maybe 4 times when this happened. Of course, one of them we're going to talk about in the 6th chapter when they were surrounding Jericho. And then also in 2 Samuel 15 and 29, it's mentioned when it was returned to its place in the time of David. And then there's another time in 1 Kings 8 and 6 when it was being brought to the temple of Solomon. This is in 1 Kings, like I say, 8 and 6. So the usual position of the ark in a travel caravan was normally in the center of the camp. So it was basically in the middle of the parade was the Ark of the Covenant. It wasn't a normal position for the Ark of the Covenant to lead the parade. It was normally in the middle of the procession. And this Ark of the Covenant was going to be their signal that it was time for the march to begin. So there had to be something to signal this massive group of people that the expedition over into the Promised Land was going to begin. And if you think about it, God always gave the children of Israel a sign when to do something. If you'll remember back in Numbers 9 and 17, it talked about following the cloud during their movements. But in this time, obviously, they're going to be following the ark. Now, this journey was different from all the journeys in the time of Moses, and talks about the pillar of the cloud being first, and it showed him the way. But here, the Ark of the Covenant was going to be the standard that was going to be used for the people to follow. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 4. Yet keep a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, so that you may know by the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before now. So here are some instructions that were given to the host of how close they were supposed to follow the ark. There were some things that were going to happen, obviously, before the children of Israel were going to be able to safely cross the river Jordan. Now, obviously, we're not sure exactly what this distance was because we don't measure things in cubits anymore. But the children of Israel obviously knew exactly what this distance was. And I think that they had a good idea that they didn't want to be any closer than what they were told. They were going to follow these instructions specifically because I think there had been enough examples to these children that, if you don't do what God says, you could be struck dead. And touching the ark obviously was something that could get you killed almost, well, not almost, but pretty much instantly.
I actually do have a scholar.
Yeah, go ahead.
3,000 feet.
Huh?
About 3,000 feet.
Yeah, that's pretty much what. Yeah. So they knew exactly what it was. Okay. So it was a precise direction that was given here, and this was in reverence to the ark, because remember that the ark was a symbol of divine presence in the presence of the Lord. So there is a reverence and respect that were due not only to the ark, but also to the priests that were bearing the ark. And that was a respect was a very important thing, and that's something that God likes is respect. So had they crowded too close to the ark, the view also might have been blocked by the other people, and they couldn't see the ark because it was people were crowded in too tight. So it was important that every group be able to see the ark as it was moving, because that was going to be their guide to exactly where they were supposed to travel in the procession. So it was very important that it was distinctly visible. And when there was going to be a dividing of the waters of Jordan as soon as the ark came to it. So that the Jews conclude from that this was a proper measure that needed to be done. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting, some of the scholars talked about, and Bill was talking about 3,000 feet. There's some scholars that seem to think this is where the distance came for a Sabbath day's journey, which is mentioned in Acts, the first chapter, verse 12. And this was basically the distance that the people were allowed to travel on the Sabbath day. And if you want, you kind of look at 3,000 feet. That's almost a mile. Is how far back. Yeah. So it's a pretty good distance. Comments about? Go ahead.
And the beauty too of the distance, as great a leader as Joshua was, and as fine a man as he was, who's leading him across the Jordan is God.
God is leading him across.
And the symbol of the ark and the distance between the people,
right?
God is doing the work.
And you'll notice here that, along with the same things that Bill said there, is, if you'll remember, what did Moses have to do while they had the rivers parted in Egypt? He had to stand there with the staff the whole time. Okay, we don't see that here. God doesn't have to have a staff. The ark is what is leading across, and that's what they're saying. So it was a different method that was going to be used. If you want to read about the children of Israel crossing the river there in Egypt, you can go to Exodus, the 19th chapter, starting with verse 10. Okay, so we see here that in that context, there was going to have to be some preparation made by the children of Israel then, and we're going to see that now. So let's look at verse 5. And Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourself, for tomorrow Jehovah will do wonders among you." So what is implied in this command is, they were being informed that they were to cleanse themselves and make themselves in a state that would be acceptable to God as they go across. And this kind of goes back to the reference in Exodus, the 19th chapter, verses 10 through 14. And it says, and Jehovah said to Moses, go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, be ready for the third day. Similar situation here. For the third day Jehovah will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai, and ye shall set bonds to the people around about, saying, take heed yourselves, do not go up the mountain or touch it, the border of it. Whosoever touches the mountain shall be surely put to death. There shall be a hand should be not a hand to touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether the beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up on the mountain. So we see here there are similar instructions that were given to the children of Israel that were given to Moses as they were crossing through the sea. They had to cleanse themselves, and they had to stay a certain distance. So you see the consistency. When God makes a plan, it's always consistent with, he has a consistent will with all the things that he does. So they had to wash themselves. They had to wash their garments. They had to abstain from the things that was going to make them unclean, basically, right, in a situation like that. And as a result of them doing everything they were supposed to do, they were going to see a miracle like they'd never seen before, because there wasn't anybody there other than Joshua and Caleb that had actually seen the waters part. And I mean, that would be something to see somebody actually part the sea. I mean, if you think back to the movie The Ten Commandments, that was a pretty impressive thing just to watch on TV. When Charlton Heston parted the water there, but it was, and that was at the time one of the greatest movie scenes that was ever made. So I mean, it was impressive on TV. Just think how impressive it would be in person to see something like that happen. Right. So I mean, that would make it even more impressive. So undoubtedly, the people had been looking forward to this event. And they wanted to see the miracle. So they were obviously pretty fired up about doing the things that were needed to be done, because they remember still, even though they weren't there, they've been told all the problems that was in Egypt, and they know all the things that they'd had to endure through the wilderness. Yeah, it's a good place to stop. So Bill can pick up at verse 6, and he can get the children of Israel across the river next week. We'll get them across the river. So I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today. Oh, really?